Hello, and welcome to this ARA webinar with staff from CPDA, the Council of Producers and Distributors of Agri-Technology, titled Adjuvant Advantage for the Sales Agronomist. This is the third webinar in Season 4 of this series, and today's webinar will focus on how to optimize pesticide performance with adjuvants in difficult environmental factors. We would like to take this time to thank Winfield United for sponsoring today's webinar. My name is Hunter Carpenter, Senior Director of Government Affairs for ARA, and I'll introduce our webinar speakers in just a bit. But first, I'll go over a few housekeeping items so you know what to expect. Webinars are an important part of the ARA professional development pathway and provide a great opportunity for ARA member companies to help educate their employees. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to the member-only ARA dashboard section of our website. As a reminder, you can log into the member-only ARA dashboard to access past webinar recordings at any time, and if you do not have an ARA login, you can email info@aradc.org to set one up. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation, but you can type them into the chat panel at any time. With that out of the way, I'm excited to introduce our speakers, Johnny Roberts, Bill Chisholm, and Greg Dahl. Johnny has 45 years of experience in the development and technical support of pesticide, fertilizer, and adjuvant formulation. 44 of those years were spent with Helena Agri Enterprises. Johnny is also the co-inventor of 15 U.S. patents related to pesticide, adjuvant, and nutritional formulations. Bill has over 45 years of experience in agriculture and pest management. He grew up on a vegetable farm in the Salinas Valley of California and worked for the California Extension and a pesticide registrant, and retired after 22 years with EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs. He received his PhD in weed science from Virginia Tech. Greg retired from Winfield United in December of 2023, following over 40 years working for both the private and public sectors, and currently serves as the president of the Weed Science Society of America and was president of the North Central Weed Science Society in 2017. He's been a certified crop advisor since 1998, and over 70 products have been brought to market from research by Greg and his team. Much of this research involves adjuvants and application technology. We'd also like to acknowledge CPDA's advisory working group for all of their input in helping make this such a successful series of webinars for both ARA and CPDA. Following today's presentation, a QR code will be displayed for you to scan from your mobile device and earn 1 IPM continuing education credit as approved for certified crop advisors. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Johnny.
Thank you, Connor. Quickly, our agenda. We're going to talk about starting clean and staying clean using tank cleaners for that purpose. How do we improve fertilizer and pesticide spray mix compatibilities with adjuvants? A general discussion on how we use adjuvants to enhance the application and efficacy of pesticides. And then using deposition and drift reduction agents and their role in ESA compliance, as well as addressing a discussion on water quality issues, and then adjuvants and crop safety. Next slide. In terms of starting clean and staying clean, first, the general guidelines on doing so. Of course, we clean our equipment out as soon as possible. Stainless steel is a much less likely to retain residues than synthetic surfaces. Your water-soluble pesticides are by far the easiest to remove. Dry products that must be fully dispersed in water all through the application and the mixing, or it can be a major source of contamination. When you're dealing with oil or emulsifiable concentrates, keep in mind that their clean out difficulty is more difficult. And also we can use a tank cleaning material to either neutralize or facilitate the removal of these residues. Next slide. We do have herbicide-specific tank cleaner guidelines. You will find these on labels or tech bulletins. For the sulfonylurea herbicides, these materials, as we know, can be extremely difficult to remove. What we use for them is typically things that have ammonia or a caustic base, and using them with the products that have a surfactant is particularly important when the spray mix is acidic or contains an oil-based adjuvant. For the auxin herbicides like dicamba and 2,4-D, when they're in the salt form, we use an ammonia or caustic base. For auxin herbicide esters, particularly things like 2,4-D, we use an alkaline paint cleaner with that also contains a surfactant. And then when we deal with flumoxazine or Valor, this particular product has a requirement that you get the pH well above 12. And what this has all done is to make it more soluble and easier to remove. You'll have some guidelines on how to look for that. And there are many commercial products available that are capable of doing this. Next slide, please. Some general guidelines for using the tank cleaners. Again, some pesticide labels have specific recommendations for the type of tank cleaner you use. Always refer to those. And they're not magic bullets. They do not eliminate the need for proper spray equipment and the clean out procedures that you typically do. Verify that expiration dates have not been exceeded. This is an issue when you use tank cleaners that are based on peroxide or hypochlorites. They could have expiration dates, and follow those and make sure that they're current before you use them. And expect high levels of foam to be generated in the clean out. And we strongly recommend using foam control agents to keep this from being an issue. Next slide. One reoccurring issue that I've found through my career that comes up is MSO or methylated seed oil compatibility with hose and tank seals. This is an issue that appears to come up every year and one that we need to manage. If your hoses and seals are made of rubber, butadiene, or neoprene, or santoprene, they can be particularly problematic. What happens? They get real sticky. The integrity of them is compromised. When seals are used in equipment that is used to transfer MSO, they can actually leak. What we do use are things that are constructed from Viton, nylon, Teflon, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. These are what are recommended for handling MSO-based materials. This applies to all MSO-based products. It doesn't matter where they were derived from, what the seed source were. For storage, steel, aluminum, and fluorinated PE and PP tanks are acceptable. One of the issues that we caution is with fiberglass. Some fiberglass tanks are not, and we're not quite sure for that, but special consideration when you're dealing with fiberglass. And oftentimes when we do an assessment of these particular problems, and what you'll find that all of your hoses, your pump seals, and those things, they have compatibility charts. And unfortunately, when you look at a lot of these compatibility charts, you'll find no mention for MSO or methylated seed oil. So what we do there, if that's the case, if your manufacturer, you ask them a question, hey, what's this with MSO, and your charts don't explain it, look for any reference on those compatibility charts for methyl oleate or biodiesel. Whatever applies to these materials would apply to your MSO products as well. Next slide. We have some excellent tank cleanout resources, particularly the Purdue Extension document 108 is very, very useful and gets into some real good specifics. There's also an excellent piece from the Grain Research Development Council out of Australia that deals with the subject. So some good resources that we can recommend that you leverage against for any other questions. Next slide, please. Solar compatibility issue, and this is one that is an evergreen opportunity. We have a lot of reasons to combine our spray mixes into one pass. When you add fertilizer, that adds another whole dimension to the problem. There's some excellent resources available on this subject. Purdue Extension has a publication titled 122 that is very, very useful. They also produce a extension publication on water temperature that Greg will be discussing about a little bit later in the presentation and how it impacts herbicide performance. And then the GRDC has an excellent discussion when the issue is trying to get compatibility in bulk type situations. Next slide, please. So when we deal with pesticide and fertilizers, the key thing to remember here is that gravity will always win. And what we mean by that, most of our, if not all of our pesticide formulations, they tend to be lighter than the fertilizers when you attempt to mix them. They'll oftentimes fail to disperse or suspend, even when the agitation is vigorous. They were never really designed to go into such environments in a lot of cases. So gravity is going to take over and they fail to disperse and suspend. One thing to keep in mind about the suspension issue, you can have excellent agitation, vigorous agitation, and have a uniform mix, but big concern is when this material is applied, the spray deposit deposition that occurs. Again, gravity is going to come into play, the agitation's gone, and you can get a lot of issues when it is not a uniform mix in terms of not only deposition, but also efficacy. And one of the things that we always stress is that if we've got a fertilizer in the mix, consider, if not require, the inclusion of a compatibility agent. Next slide, please. We have some general use guidelines on compatibility agents. There's a number of them that are commercial today. You'll find the use rate range can be as low as 1 to as high as 4 pints per 100 gallons of water. Keep in mind that these are much more effective as a preventative than they are as a curative. If you have them in before the monster is created, they work at much lower rates. So keep that in mind. If a general rule is if you've got a fertilizer in this mix, add the compatibility agents to the fertilizer first. That tends to make their efficacy that much better in terms of preventing clabber of that material and any kind of a separation. You'll find that the higher range of the compatibility agent will be required if you're trying to resolve a problem after the fact. Next slide, please. Greg?
Yes, I'm here. So one of the things that going along, this is an old thing, but a lot of people have forgotten it. At one time, all of the glyphosate labels said not to use a an oil adjuvant, whether it was a crop oil concentrate or an MSO, and that was true because there was a lot of antagonism going on. And what we found in development was it was really not the adjuvant that was the problem. It wasn't the oil. It was the emulsifier that was in the oil product. And so we now do have some oil adjuvants, especially the high surfactant oil concentrates that are in fact glyphosate friendly. And so we can do that, but make sure that the oil adjuvant that you're using, and in fact, is compatible with glyphosate. Next slide. And then this is something that I'm really adamant about is that um, there are certain things like this one here with Enlist One and a K-salt glyphosate. Um, please don't mix this up until you're ready to spray and then spray right away and then clean it out right away because this has a tendency to salt out really bad. And you can't stop it. You can slow it down, but you can't stop it. And so I would not mix this one until you're ready to spray. Spray it out and then clean out your sprayer so you get rid of any problems you might have. And then next slide. And so this is kind of thing. Start clean. Don't mix till you're ready to spray. Add water. Mix properly. Spray properly and clean out that sprayer right away. Next slide. And so this is a different mixture. And one of the other things I say is things that need to get wet need to get wet. And what we have here is it was a mesotrione type herbicide with glyphosate with atrazine. There wasn't enough water. There wasn't enough surfactant. Um, there wasn't enough time. And you can see we've got a real mess here. Next slide. So then on the left-hand side, we've got that same mixture. But what we did on the right-hand side, we knew that the mesotrione was actually starved for both surfactant and water. So we added more surfactant and more water actually before the mesotrione went in. We also knew that the atrazine was stealing surfactant from the mix because you've got all those surfaces on the dry particles that are in the atrazine. They're all going to want surfactant to be there. So it's stealing surfactant out of that mix. So when we added extra surfactant, added extra water, we got the dry products or the products that needed to get wet. We allowed them to get wet, and then everything mixed really nice. So things that needed to get wet need to get wet. Next slide. And then this is on AMS, and so we had dry AMS here, and what we did was we had it dissolving in water, and it will dissolve in water. And so when we put it into 90-degree water, in about 6 minutes, all of the dry AMS was dissolved. And when we put it into 40-degree water, it was somewhere between 13 and 19 minutes for that dry AMS to completely dissolve in that cold water. So things take more time to mix when it's cold, and so take some extra time to do that. And another thing that I will say is that I do have retailers that actually will use heated water for the first 1 to 2 weeks of the season. And then when the water warms up, the chemicals warm up, things like that, they will quit using the hot water. But for the first couple weeks in the spring, I do have retailers that are heating the water to make the mixing a much more efficient process. Next slide. Okay.
Hey, one of the things that requires its own series of discussions is induction sprayer when we're doing mixing guidelines for it. These are becoming more and more common as we need closed systems. The big issue here is that when we try to induct multiple products at one time, this is something we have to avoid. As everyone knows, the golden rule of compatibility is not to let pure chemicals come in contact with one another. Always do it one at a time. Add plenty of dispersion before you add the next ingredient with a water flush in between each component where possible. Realize that some adjuvants and some DRAs in particular may gel if they are not diluted in sufficient water. This is a problem that occur. You flush in the adjuvant and you add water, and all of a sudden it will gel. There are ways to prevent that, and just be aware that it can be a problem. Also, avoid at all costs getting excess air into the system, particularly if you have emulsifiable concentrates or oil-based adjuvants. You can form a clabber, which is just basically another word for mayonnaise, as well as excessive a foam. And for this particular mixer, we always include a foam control adjuvant because they can literally be a foam generating machine if you don't. Next slide. So general guidelines for compatibility rely on prevention more than resolution. Dilution is often the solution to them. We do not mix. We avoid pre-mixing undiluted products. Any spray mix should be applied where possible soon after preparation. If you're contemplating a spray mix that has never been done before and you have no commercial experience, we strongly suggest that either you or the manufacturer do a jar test to verify compatibility before you put the mix together. Recognize that addition order matters, and your oil-based adjuvants and emulsifiable concentrates are generally added last. Next slide. We all have or should have a compatibility management toolbox this time of year. We have access now to portable pH meters and compatibility agents, all a matter of ways to fix and prevent these problems. One thing that we'd like to stress is that when you encounter a problem and then you solve it, document that. We've often seen the same problems show up year after year, and you fixed them one time and you wind up having to fix it again. So document those problems and share solutions with manufacturers and others. Next slide, please. Greg, I'll let you pick up on how the adjuvant
Yes.
selection can have a huge
Yeah.
influence on performance.
Yes. Thank you. So this was some work that was put together by Joe Janowski, who used to be my boss at Winfield United, and he went through hundreds and thousands of different uh, studies with herbicides, and we were just looking at was the results good enough or not good enough, and what he found was that if you needed to apply an adjuvant and you didn't apply one, we could get somewhere between a 30 and a 90% reduction in performance in weed control by just not using an adjuvant at all when we needed one. And then if we pick the wrong type of adjuvant, so we're using an oil instead of a surfactant or a surfactant instead of an oil or something like that. We got between 5 and 50% reduction in weed control. And sometimes we increase the risk of crop injury. And then the last thing we looked at is if you had the right type of adjuvant, but you just picked a good enough adjuvant versus a premium adjuvant, that premium adjuvant gave us between 5 and 25% more weed control than we got with just a good enough type product. And so picking the right adjuvant is an important thing to do. Okay, next slide. And one of the things we'd like to really recommend to you guys is there are a lot of CPDA certified adjuvants. We've been working on them for many years, and if we go down to the red wording, this can actually be on a pesticide label. When an adjuvant is to be used with this product, and then it's the company name, recommends the use of a Council of Producers and Distributors of Agritechnology certified adjuvant. So the people there, the company with the pesticide, is recommending a CPDA certified adjuvant. And we really like this because there are a lot of them out there. They're on a lot of different labels, and a lot of good things are coming out of this. So, next slide, please. So, one of the things with this is that to be a certified CPDA certified adjuvant, you've got to complete and qualify with 17 different benchmarks, which is safety and things like that. You've got to have a good label, good SDSs. We know the toxicology, things like that, and we're using the right ingredients. Also, the adjuvant claims and ingredients must be validated. So there's a lot there. As I mentioned, there's 17 things that have to be satisfied in order to have a CPDA certified adjuvant. Next slide, please. And you can see on here, we've got over 230 products that are CPDA certified adjuvants, and you can get it by going to the CPDA site and seeing them. And then another thing I would add to this is well over 400 pesticides. It's pretty close to 500 pesticides actually recommend the use of CPDA certified adjuvants. Next slide.
Okay, one of the things that people oftentimes do not understand or realize that evaporation is such a huge issue impacting both deposition and absorption of the active ingredient. As Greg likes to say, plants don't drink rocks. And what we mean by that, if that water evaporates out of that spray deposit, we have much less tendency for the active ingredient to be absorbed because they're depending on diffusion for that absorption to occur. And having it do so with no water present in the spray droplet is very difficult, if not impossible. Next slide. When herbicide dries on the outside of a leaf, it's ability to be absorbed by that plant surface goes down tremendously. And also realize that we're dealing with a deposition issue here. If the spray deposit has lost its water, the ability for that material to cover thoroughly all through the canopy is reduced significantly. So preventing evaporation of water from these spray deposits and also even the spray application becomes a big issue. Next slide. Back to the observation that we've made earlier, things that need to get wet, need to get wet. So we do a lot with adjuvants in the area of reducing evaporation of water. Next slide. We have some great tools for doing this. Probably the ones that are most established are the oil-based adjuvants. They can reduce evaporation while also increasing absorption. We have essentially three main ways of accessing oils. We can use petroleum oils, and typically they're commercialized in the form of crop oil concentrate adjuvants. We can use straight crop seed oils like from soybean and cotton and canola, where we make an adjuvant directly out of the seed oil. And then the category that is perhaps growing the most in the adjuvant field, the methylated seed oils, and also called modified seed oils. These materials are getting a lot of new interest and are great problem solvers. Next slide. Greg, would you like to pick up the discussion here?
Sure, I would. So I've got a map of the United States here, and you're probably aware of this, but as we move to the west, our relative humidities go down. It's drier out there, things like that. So anything that has got a yellow color or a green or a blue color, those are pretty dry areas. And where we have the orange or brown area, that is got higher relative humidities and it's more lush usually. And so kind of the reason we put this map here is that wherever you've got those areas as you move west, as a generality, MSOs will do a better job in weed control because they're going to penetrate the leaf surface better. They're not going to dry out. Um, and they just outperform the crop oil concentrates out in that part of the world. And as we move to the orange area, then we lose that difference between MSOs and COCs. They basically perform about the same. And then if we move far enough to the east and the south, we will actually get so much relative humidity and high temperatures that the MSOs may cause some crop injuries. So we need to respect that environment. And then one thing I would say to you is that if we have a drought, the line goes east, and if we have good growing conditions, the line will go west. So next slide. And then this is some work that was done at Winfield United, but basically they're looking at three oil type, MSO type products, whether they're an MSO or a high surfactant MSO. You can see we're getting a lot more movement from those MSOs down into that leaf surface compared to where we didn't have an oil adjuvant. We're not getting any penetration. Where we've got an MSO, we've got really good penetration into that leaf surface. Next slide.
And when we talk about our oil adjuvants, we're back to my observation again that we're fighting gravity. These oils, they're going to separate. They don't mix with water. So we use a type of surfactant called an emulsifier to make sure that mixture occurs. So emulsion uniformity is important of these oil-based products. And again, we want to stress the spray mix is one thing. And to be quite honest, the easiest part to get a uniform mixture, but it's in the spray deposit. We really are looking for this uniformity. If we have our uniformity maximized, then we have the potential for getting our best efficacy while reducing crop injury. Next slide. One of the innovations that has come out in recent years is the introduction of high surfactant oil concentrates, or HSOCs. And these products are addressing the antagonisms that Greg alluded to earlier between using oil-based products in lieu of surfactants. This particular class sort of splits the difference. They can either be MSO or paraffin based. The typical use rates are 0.5 to 0.75%, which is lower than your traditional COC materials. That is accomplished by the surfactant piece, basically keeping more material on target. But these materials are becoming attractive because of their ability to simplify adjuvant decision making. Next slide, please.
So this is something, whenever we can put two products together and come up with a convenience product, I just love that. A lot of convenience products are just wonderful. But one of the things I want to warn you about is when we're trying to make a product that does a lot of functions, oftentimes some sacrifices need to be made. You can only put so much into a gallon. And so, if we're combining, say, a surfactant with an oil, with a water conditioner, and a drift reduction adjuvant, something's probably going to come up short. And usually, what I see with these products is that it's usually the water conditioner that will come up short. And you have to make a trade-off, and things don't fit everywhere. But this is something to look at. And so, many times, if you really need great control, you might need to be putting the product together so you get the right rates. Because what happens is, in order to meet a price point, oftentimes the rate of the adjuvant is too low. So, next slide.
So here we're talking about going back to the future. As we all know, managing this weed resistance problem is becoming a huge, huge issue for us. And we're back to the future with pre-emergent herbicides, as you can tell by their discovery dates. This is some really, really old technology. Um, we're back to trying to control these weeds or they have a chance to reproduce. So they're becoming a big, big tool, and adjuvants have a role in their use. Next slide, please. Because they've been commercialized for such a long period of time, we understand a lot about what makes them work and what don't work. I've just set up two references here, but we really have a pretty good understanding of how they work and what their limitations are. Next slide, please. And the limitations that we've always had with soil applied herbicides is the environmental variables that impact it. You know, they're actually in many ways more difficult than making foliar applications. They can run off, they can volatilize, they can be decomposed by sunlight. The ones that have some degree of water solubility can leach or percolate off. Some of them can be broken down rapidly by microbial activity. So there's a lot of variables that come into play with getting a good, consistent response from these materials. That's why you see on so many of the labels directions on when they should be applied, as far as before or after a rainfall and those type of things. So trying to address some of these variables becomes a issue that adjuvants can have a role in. Next slide, please. The oldest one is probably the oldest established use of using adjuvants with soil applied pesticides is the use of non-ionic surfactants to address soils that have a high rate of water repellency. Obviously, if you're making a water-based spray mix on a soil surface that has a lot of water repellency, getting that material to percolate to get down can be quite difficult. You'll find that there's a number of these products on the market. Use rates can be extensively broad. They can be as low as 0.05 to as high as 0.25. Their rate is dependent on the type of water repellent soil that you're dealing with. But typically, they are non-ionic surfactants so that they are not tied up and prevented from doing what they're intended to do. Next slide. A more difficult and challenging use is where we can use an adjuvant to actually enhance the retention of the soil applied herbicide. And here, what we're dealing with for those materials that have the ability to leach out, move into areas that we don't want them to. There is a real Goldilocks spot that we're looking for in a lot of these materials where we're trying to get them down, but at the same time, not down too much. Typically, if we're dealing with soils that have a high organic matter content, for example, those that are above 4%, that organic matter itself is going to actually retain and absorb the active ingredient. But when we're less than 4%, and that's typically in your sandy and coarse soils, we can use adjuvants to retain or increase absorption on them to the surface, particularly the active ingredients that have some measure of oil solubility. The water soluble ones, it becomes very, very challenging, but with the ones that have, and that typically is most of your big ones, they have some degree of oil solubility, and we can uh, enhance getting that Goldilocks spot. One of the things we want to stress here is that in these applications, you often find liquid fertilizers being combined with them as well. And again, we strongly recommend the use of a compatibility agent when this is the case. Next slide, please. We're going to have a discussion now on deposition and drift control agents. And one of the things that we want to clear up in terms of definitions is recognizing that you could argue that all drift reduction agents are deposition aids, but not all deposition aids have the ability to reduce driftable fines. And keep that in mind as Bill begins this discussion on the use of these materials as a tool in our ESA compliance. Bill?
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I'd like to take this opportunity and thank you very much for including me to talk about the Endangered Species Act and a little bit about what growers and applicators can do to protect these species. The EPA's goal in developing the Endangered Species Act, they wrote up the herbicide and an insecticide strategy. Their goal was to keep the pesticide on the field. They developed a set of options that the user can use to reduce spray drift and to reduce runoff and erosion. The majority, certainly not all, but the majority of threatened and endangered species and their critical habitats are not on agricultural fields, so keeping the pesticide on the field is the best way to protect these species. Next slide, please. Will all labels change immediately? I get asked this quite often. All new pesticide labels are being evaluated to protect listed species. There's currently only a handful of pesticides that have been evaluated to protect these species. And currently, all registered pesticides have to go through a re-registration process, which can take several years. And it's going to take several years for all the labels to be changed and be evaluated to protect endangered species. So we have a number of years for this whole transition to take place. Next slide. Where can I find ESA information? There's a number of really good websites. The EPA has one called Bulletins Live 2. It talks about where these species can be found and some mitigations that should be followed for a given pesticide label. They have a mitigation menu which describes the mitigation process and the different steps you can take to help keep the products on the field. They have a new one. It's called the Pesticide App for Label Mitigations, PALM, and that's an online app that you can use to help calculate how many mitigation points you have and help you calculate how much your spray drift buffer has been reduced. There's also a good one I like, the Pesticide Environmental Stewardship website, and that's got a whole host of information about ESA and other pesticide information. That's a real helpful one. I'm with the Weed Science Society of America, and we have our own webpage. We have definitions, handouts, presentations. All our presentations and everything are for use by anyone, so you should check us out. Next slide, please. So the two categories of things that the EPA is concerned about is runoff and erosion and spray drift. So for runoff and erosion, there's 40 different ways to get points. Many counties in the US have relief points. The agency determined that they might have lower rainfall, and so they have relief points in many counties. If you're doing conservation tillage or have cover crops, you can get points. If you have grassed waterways or filter strips next to the field, you can get points. You can get a point for tracking your mitigation measures. If you can reduce the annual application rate, you can get points for that. And working with a technical expert, a crop consultant, for example, in many cases can get you points for that too. So there's over 40 ways to get points. Next slide, please. Spray drift mitigation options. For ground applications, there's over 15 ways to get buffer reductions. You can increase the droplet size. You can add a drift reducing adjuvant. Over on the right, I want to point out the Liberty Ultra label. The label says you don't have to have a spray drift buffer if you use a drift reducing adjuvant at 0.3%. They put out a supplemental label and change that concentration to a much lower one. You can lower the boom height and reduce your spray buffer distance. You can reduce the single application rate. And if your field has downwind windbreaks and things like that, you can get credit for that. I also want to point out if you have a ground rig and you have a low boom and you go from a fine droplet size to a medium droplet size, you get a 75% reduction in spray drift distance. If you add a drift reducing adjuvant, you get another 30% reduction, which means you've got basically 100% reduction in the spray drift buffer. So some of these things are pretty easy to change. Next slide, please. I also want to talk a little bit about what CPDA and CropLife are doing. They've got a number of things on their websites that are very helpful. cpda.com/services/ESA-mitigation. Next slide, please. So on their website, they have an ESA toolbox. They have a series of videos, short 5-minute videos, really easy to watch, talking about mitigation, just an overview, talking about Bulletins Live 2, talking about spray drift, talking about runoff. Those are all done by Stanley Culpepper out of the University of Georgia. They have an ESA 101, a nice ESA flowchart telling you the steps to follow to look for mitigations, and EPA's educational resources. Next slide, please. And then in addition, the CropLife magazine recently came out with a ESA technical guide. It's a really great document and really helpful for getting you up to speed on some of the mitigations and what you can do to help protect these species. Next slide, and I think I'll turn it over to Johnny.
Um,
Okay.
the issue, Greg, I'm gonna let you pick up on the water
Sure.
quality.
Yeah. So one of the things we really haven't talked about too much yet is how good is your water? Because a lot of problems can come from poor quality water. A lot of times we have calcium or magnesium or other cations that are in the water, and they can really screw up the performance of a lot of herbicides. Um, First off, we've got glyphosate and glufosinate or Liberty type products. We've also got a lot of group twos, herbicides like the clethodims, and actually some group fours can be messed up with poor water quality. Next slide. Oh, there should be one before that, I think. All right. Well, we'll go from here. So we don't want to have any crystals. We learned earlier on that plants don't drink rocks. Here we've got some glyphosate on a leaf surface. We've got a surfactant with it, And do you see any crystals? And the answer is no. And that's a good thing because the product will work. And so then next slide. And then this one here, we've added some calcium to it. And do you see crystals? Yes, you do. And that's a bad thing because those crystals are calcium glyphosate, and they're not going to work. That herbicide will not work. And then if we add in AMS or some water conditioner, what will happen is we will still have crystals, but those crystals will be gypsum, which is calcium and sulfate, and they're going to fall out. Whereas the ammonia and the glyphosate are going to stay liquid longer, and the ammonia is actually going to help get that glyphosate in the plants. So that's why we like AMS. Some of the other water conditioners have other technologies, but they do similar things. Next slide. And so this is a picture of two glyphosate molecules in spray water. And then we'll go to the next slide. And if we add a calcium there, we have tied up those two glyphosate molecules. They are not going to be able to do weed control. And so that's a bad thing. We can, using AMS, keep those glyphosate molecules free. They'll actually combine with the ammonia, as I mentioned, and the calcium and the sulfate will fall out, and we will get satisfactory results. Next slide. Okay, and then this is a slide I thought would come up earlier. So what we've got here is a map of the United States and Canada. Blue water, or the blue color, is actually quite good water quality, and you should not have much problem with antagonism. You may, in fact, have problem the other way and generate a lot of foam. When we look at the orange or the dark brown colors, that is really bad water. It's extremely hard. And so we need to have some water conditioning adjuvants in that mix in order to overcome antagonism. Next slide.
One of the other issues, in addition to water hardness, is the pH of the spray mix. As we discussed in our webinar dealing with insecticides and adjuvants, we've got some general guidelines here to follow. One thing we want to stress that if your pH is greater than 7, you either have the choice of applying that mixture as soon as possible or using an adjuvant to adjust that pH to a more favorable zone. Typically, we try to stay between 3.5 and 6. But if we refer back to that original webinar, there's some real guidelines and rules you need to follow on keeping that to do way in that range to do so. Keep in mind that the higher temperatures increase this issue as a problem. The higher the temperature, the more the concern about pH impacting the degradation of insecticides. Next slide, please. Greg, you'd like to speak on how water temperature negatively
Yes.
impacts herbicide
Yes.
efficacy?
So we talked about this earlier, but basically I wanted to show this. So we've got 4 different herbicides with 4 different water temperatures. And if you look at the 2,4-D, the glufosinate, the mesotrione, and the glyphosate plus dicamba, they're not going to perform very well at that 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we look at the other side of it, they're also not going to work very good at the 133 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, but they will work quite well in between there. So water temperature is important. And like I had mentioned earlier, I do have some retailers that are heating water early in the spring in order to get around this issue. Next slide.
We're going to have a general discussion on the role of spray adjuvants in crop safety. One thing that we want to stress is that adjuvants used alone and at label rates have a very low potential for any kind of crop injury. Issues may occur when they get combined with multiple component spray mixes. If the spray application volume is low, if you have high heat and humidity, and if the spray mix is not uniform. On the upside, adjuvants may actually reduce crop injury potential by reducing drift and preventing concentrated spray droplets and minimizing droplet bounce to sensitive parts of the crop. Again, always refer to your label and tech bulletins when you're dealing with this particular issue. But a big part of it is training. The real golden rule on these issues is that the more components in a given spray mix, the more risk that you need to manage. Next slide, please. So some general guidelines, as we stress, referring to the label and tech bulletins. If you do have a multiple pesticide mix and there's different recommendations as far as crop safety, always follow the most restrictive product guidelines in that given mix. Be aware that humidity, high temperature, low spray volumes, they tend to increase the potential for any kind of a crop injury from any application. Uh, if you have a mix that you've never tried before, verify just by direct observation or by jar test that that mixture is uniform and fully dispersed. If you do have UN 28 and 32, which is sometimes added as a almost an adjuvant more than a fertilizer, be aware that this material in particular can increase crop injury potential, particularly when there are oils in the mix. Herbicides that have a crop injury potential on their own, they may indeed get hotter with an oil adjuvant that compared to a surfactant when used with it. And also be aware that oil-based adjuvants in this situation may vary in their injury potential based on the type of oil that is used. Obviously, MSO would be hotter than a COC, and et cetera, as a generalization. Next slide, please. So to kind of wrap all this up and summarize what we've been talking about, adjuvants do indeed have a role in tuning up a spray mix. One of the things that should be obvious, every pesticide application benefits from enhanced deposition, and adjuvants have a role in maintaining that. Uh, it's critical that our spray mixes be fully compatible and uniform to make sure that we keep them on target and we get the maximum benefit out of them. Verify that your adjuvant product functional claims follow standardized definitions, and the easiest way to do that is to use CPDA certified spray adjuvants. And then what are the applications to prevent these problems? Well, we always stress including a foam control adjuvant. Foam is becoming a bigger issue to deal with, and it's one that's pretty much guaranteed with all of our mixers. If the herbicide has a liquid fertilizer, we strongly recommend the inclusion of a compatibility agent. Next slide. So inevitably, in these times, growers are looking at a way to get maximum economy out of their applications. There's oftentimes resistance. These are some of the objections that you may run into as a retailer using adjuvants. A feeling that if I really needed them, then they would have been built into the formulation to begin with. Yes, oftentimes adjuvants are indeed built into the herbicide pesticide formulation. However, there are just too many variables in the spray mix, too many soil types, too much water volume to make it possible to include it fully. Even though you've never had performance issues before, be aware that ag input formulations change, environmental conditions change. So what happened and what worked last year won't necessarily work this year. And how do you even know if you need them? Keeping these materials on target should always be the goal of any application. And as far as them costing too much, we would argue that maximizing efficacy is likely much cheaper than the cost of a respray or an application problem. Next slide.
So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A. Thanks again to Winfield United for sponsoring today's webinar. I'll throw up the QR code so folks can scan that for their CEUs, but I'll dive right into the Q&A here. First question is, what can I do when a foam problem does develop?
We have these any number of excellent foam control or prevention agents. One of the things that we would point out, uh, it's much easier to prevent the foam than it is to correct it. If you'll include those foam control agents in the mix before you start adding the agitation, they'll work much better and at a lower rate. If you've got one after the fact, you didn't include one, now you've got to deal with it. Uh, be aware that some of these materials are more effective at prevention than they are at knockdown. And so you look at it for a product that has knockdown ability for those cases after the fact.
Next question. Many tank mixing recommendations mention to add surfactants last. How does this suggestion relate to multifunctional adjuvants like water conditioners plus a surfactant or liquid water conditioners that contain AMS?
On that, you have to go with what is the most important, and I'm going to say surfactant plus AMS because the AMS needs to get in early, and so you're just going to have to drag it in there, and that is one of the things that you have with these convenience products is sometimes things need to go in a different place. So.
Next question. When widespread use, sorry, go ahead, Johnny.
That's a good question, and then the oil-based ad is separate from the surfactants. As a general rule, they go in last in that additional order sequence.
Yeah.
Next question. When widespread use of glyphosate in row crops started in the 1990s, we were educated that ammonium sulfate must go into the spray solution first to tie up hard water ions, then glyphosate second. Was this incorrect education because tie up doesn't happen in the spray tank, but it happens on the plant leaf?
I think on that, it depends on how bad it is because um, actually you are correct that most of the antagonism takes place on the leaf surface. But if you have really hard water, you are actually going to get some of that antagonism taking place in that spray tank as well. That's all that grit that's on the bottom of the tank. That is the calcium plus the sulfate from your AMS. And so it's not 100% that it's taking place on the plant. I do believe most of it does take place on the plant, but some of it can take place in the tank as well.
And also from a compatibility standpoint, it's usually better to get the AMS into solution before you start adding other components, just from a straight ease of mixing and preventing
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
Next question. I had a spray mix problem that I was able to solve using a compatibility agent. Will it still work as intended?
So that is the ultimate. It depends. So you're going to be able to get it to spray out, but we don't know what happened in that mess, and so uh, it may work and it may not work. So
Yeah,
Uh,
that is a depends question. And one point, one of these things that these compatibility agents tend to do, they tend to make the spray mixes thinner so that you can spray them out. And so the important thing is to keep that agitation going, um, because it is a thinner spray mix, which is your intent, so you can get it out of the equipment, but it will settle quickly as a general rule. So keep that agitation after you've treated a mix of compatibility aid.
Next question. Do you have any cautions when working with old product?
yeah, I do. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with old product. You need to take a look at it. If you really are unsure of it, I would strongly encourage a jar test because we do have things. Hopefully, we will have products that will last 3 years for shelf life, but sometimes we don't. There are things that are real twitchy. There's several products that really don't last into the second year, and then being you've got an open container that allows a lot of things to get in there that may mess you up.
We're starting to have some folks drop off. I just did want to note that we will have our next webinar Wednesday, January 28th at 1 p.m., focused on drip reduction adjuvants and effective nozzle selection. That webinar is also sponsored by Winfield United. Please join us for that. I'm going to leave this QR code up here, and we do have a few more questions that have come in. So, gentlemen, if you have a few more minutes, we'll just do a little bit more Q&A.
Sure.
Another
Sure.
question. I had some product freeze and separate this winter. Will it be okay?
Um, that also depends. What I would do is I would try and read the label, see if you can get some information there, see if you can get some information from the manufacturer. There are many things that if you can get it agitated and warmed up, you can bring it back. But there are some things that just you won't be able to bring it back. So, you're not the first one to go through this situation, so somebody probably knows.
One person said oil adjuvants reduce evaporation. Is there a rule of thumb on the percentage reduction?
As a general rule of thumb, it's 1%, though that has been by volume, but that has been somewhat challenged with the introduction of the HSOCs. You can get that evaporation reduction at a lower rate, but typically it's a 1% by volume minimum use rate when you're trying to do that feature.
And how do folks decide what's best to use when considering oil-based products that use emulsifiers versus high surfactant oil concentrates?
Well, the challenge that the formulator has when they're building these products is that their surfactant that they're including at a higher rate is going to also have to act as the emulsifier. So that is one of the challenges that formulators of these products, when they're made commercial, remember I mentioned that all emulsifiers are surfactants, but not all surfactants are emulsifiers. Here's a case where they have to formulate and build around surfactants that can and do to emulsify, and they've been quite successful at doing so.
Next question. Pre-emergent soil applied herbicides are impacted by many variables. What percentage improvement will a good quality adjuvant provide?
Boy, that is a very, very soil dependent question,
Agreed.
product dependent question. A lot of one of the things that this particular application is lacking is any label guidance. And so you really depend on the manufacturer of that particular adjuvant to make a best recommendation for a given soil type and the specific herbicide that you're doing. So it's very, very difficult. It can be quite dramatic, the impact, and it can be a non-event, particularly if the organic matter is very high, then
Yeah.
retention is going to be high on its own. So
Yeah.
that's very much a depends question.
Well, thanks again, gentlemen, for just the fantastic information you've provided today. On behalf of ARA and CPA, I want to thank everyone for being able to join us again. Please join us later this month for our next webinar in this series. I'm going to leave the QR code up for just a couple more minutes, but thank you again and have a great day. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.